1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sewing steps I would really love to skip. Let's talk about it. Hey Stitches, it's your girl Kris. Welcome if you're new or welcome back to the channel. Now, I recently watched a video right here on YouTube from my girl Pat from My Embellished Life. Let's take a look.
I think we can all agree that sewing is definitely one of our favorite pastimes. However, there are some processes and steps that are very annoying, and I would go as far as to say they can make you want to pull your hair out sometimes. So let's talk about it.
Having seen Pat's video, I thought it was brilliant. And that got me thinking, what are the sewing steps that I wouldn't mind missing at all? And so for today's video, I am going to be sharing 5 sewing steps that I could do without. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. So the first sewing step that your girl would not mind missing has to be interfacing. You guys, I do not like cutting or applying interfacing. Like once I get my fabric pieces cut out, I'm just ready to jump on and start sewing. And it really irks me that I have to take additional time to cut out the interfacing and then stand at my hot iron and apply it. Now, I actually did buy a really cool gadget. It was some sort of like press. I think it's an Elna press. And I bought it over in the United Kingdom. And I had it delivered to my best friend. But guess what, you guys? It was massive. So I never actually got it to me here on the island. I know that it's getting good use. I know she actually uses it to press uniforms and the like. And I'm really happy that she's getting use out of it. But I think that that press might have made the application of interfacing a little bit quicker and easier for your girl. But since I didn't get it, I have to do it in the old school way. Stand up at the iron, put the iron down on the interfacing, hold it for 5 to 10 seconds, lift the iron back up, move your hand, put the iron back down, and so on and so forth until all of the interfacing has been applied. Now, I guess it's not too much of a big deal when you're working with smaller pieces. Let's think a neckline facing, for example. But when you have to interface large pieces like the facing for a blazer, child, like, can somebody come and do this part for me and just cut my interfacing and apply it where necessary and just hand it on over for me to sew up? Is that really too much to ask? Goodness. So number 1 definitely has to be anything interfacing. Now, the second sewing step that I would love to skip is grading my seams. Now, if you don't know, grading your seams refers to trimming down each of your seams at differing heights. So if you have 2 seams, you might grade one down to 1/4 inch and then one down to 1/8 of an inch. And grading seams really does help to reduce bulk at your seam lines. But guys, it can be so time consuming. It's so much easier just to grab my pinking shears and to trim 2-3 seams simultaneously, but they all end up to be the same length. And then of course, that means additional bulk at your seam line. Sometimes, to be honest, you guys, I just do it that way, especially if I'm using very lightweight fabrics that are not by themselves very bulky. I might just take the lazy route and trim all of my seams at once. But if I'm working with heavier weight fabrics like denim or twill, or if I'm making certain types of garments, back again to that blazer situation, then I will take the time to grade down my seams. But I really wouldn't mind if I could skip it. So that is number 2. My third sewing step that I can do without is definitely bias binding. Oh my goodness. I have never ever liked using bias binding. It's not that it is difficult. I just find it can be finicky and it can be tedious, especially if you're making your own bias binding. I recently had an experience where I had to make my self bias binding for my True Bias Southport dress. Keep your eyes open, keep your notifications on because it will be here quite soon. Now, the process of making bias binding, at least the process that I have followed, can be quite tedious. You have to first cut out strips of your bias binding along the bias of your fabric. So you have to establish the bias of your fabric and then cut your strips. And then you have to sew your strips together, cut the seams and press them open. And then you actually have to use a what is it called, boy? I think it's called like a bias tape or something. Is it bias binding tape maker? Something or the other. A fancy little gadget that you thread your bias through and you pull it along while at the same time trying to iron your bias strips to get the folds in place. So if you're doing a single fold bias or a double fold bias, then you use that little bias maker thingy in order to get the creases in. Now, of course, if you don't have one, you can fold your bias on your own, like without a gadget, but I do not recommend it. I really do not recommend it. That being said, I still don't like that bias tape maker thing. When I was using it to do my true bias Southport, I found that it wasn't folding both sides of my bias in at the same width. Obviously, that might be as a result of user error. It's not something that I do very often, and perhaps it's just that I need a little bit more practice at it. But I found it a little bit frustrating that one side was folding deeper than the other side. And in some cases, I had to go back in and then press out my strip straight again and then try again in order to get the bias binding made up. Now, once it has been made, you then have to apply it. And again, I don't find it to be difficult. It's not nothing hard to do, but I do find it to be very tedious. Now, I actually shared a video over on the Love Notions channel way back in 2024 featuring 5 steps for applying bias binding. So it's not a case where I don't know what to do. But gosh, guys, I would choose a facing every single time over bias binding. Now I'll go ahead and see if I can link the video in here. I'm not sure if I can, but if I can, I will. So you can go and check out my 5 tips for applying bias binding. And one of the main tips I would give would be to edge stitch your seam allowance to your bias binding because it helps to fold under the edge of your bias binding so much easier. But as I said, if I could skip it, I will skip it. Now, I just want to quickly mention that store-bought bias binding is obviously quicker to apply in that you don't actually have to take the time to make your own bias from scratch. However, I don't particularly like store-bought bias binding unless I'm using it like on the inside of a bodice or something in order to create a casing or something of the sort. But to finish off necklines and arm size, I don't particularly like it because it tends to be quite stiff. And I have a preference for using lightweight fabrics like rayons, and I find that store-bought bias binding on those types of fabric just make like the neckline and the arm size stick up. And I don't like that. So I will take the time to make my own bias binding if I'm using rayons and viscoses and chalets, but I don't like it, you guys. Can we figure out something else? I mean, there is something else facing, but there are just some times when doing the bias binding seems to be unavoidable. So we have done 1, 2, 3 steps that your girl will happily miss. Now drop me some comments down below and let me know if so far you agree with my steps, and if you have different steps, then be sure to drop them down below so we can continue the conversation. Now on to number 4. The 4th sewing step that I would not mind missing is hand stitching. Really and truly, why should I sit with a needle and thread when I can use this baby right here? If I can get away with using my sewing machine, then I'm definitely going to choose that any day over hand stitching. Now, there are some patterns that I have come across, particularly in the Big 5, where it requires you to do things like slip stitch your yoke over your shoulder seams, stuff like that. And I'm like, why should I have to slip stitch a yoke over my shoulder seam? Why am I not just doing the burrito method? And so whenever I come across that in a Big 5 pattern, then I definitely choose to do a burrito method over any sort of like hand stitching, slip stitching, or whatever. A lot of the times the patterns don't even recommend the burrito method. As I said, they only have you cut out 1 layer and then you have to sit with your needle and thread and sew that baby together. Like, Whose brilliant idea was that? So as I said, if it is a shirt dress and I know I can do the burrito method, then I'm going to do the burrito method. Now, there are other patterns as well that require you to do hand sewing, like slip stitching your lining to your bodice. And sometimes I will do that. If I'm working with lightweight fabrics, again, think the rayons and the challis, then 9 times out of 10, I will sit down and do the hand stitching. But if I'm working with something heavier and I can figure out a way to edge stitch it down to my bodice main, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to use my edge stitching as a feature, even if that is not what is intended by the pattern. Now, in my earlier sewing journey, I also used to spend lots of time slip stitching my collar stand facing to my collar stand main, because I found that doing it by the machine, it often meant that pieces of my collar stand were not getting caught in the stitching. And then I would have to unpick and then try to ease it in and do it over. And I found that hand stitching it into place was a little bit easier, even if it took me longer. However, I am happy to report that I have grown substantially in my sewing journey, and now 9 times out of 10, I am going to use my machine to stitch my collar stands into place. This has taken years and years for me to perfect, and sometimes I still don't get it 100% right, but I am doing much better now than I had been doing in the past. So this is a public service announcement. If you are new to sewing and you find that there are steps that are giving you grief, give yourself grace. Over time, with persistence and practice, you will get much better. Trust me, I am a walking example of how persistence really pays off in the sewing game. Right, so what is the last and final sewing step that your girl would not mind missing? Now, the 5th and final sewing step that your girl will happily miss is trying to level off and hem a circle or bias skirt. You guys, it's not so much the hemming that is the issue. It is the trying to level it off so that it is indeed level before trying to hem it. Now, if you are unfamiliar with working with circle skirts or bias skirts, once you sew them up, because of the bias element, your fabric is very likely to drop. And it means that you end up with a very uneven hem. It doesn't matter if when you cut it out, your hemline was perfection. It is always recommended to at least leave your garment hanging for 24 hours or more to allow the bias to drop. And once it has done that, you guys, then you will notice that parts of your skirt are very uneven. And I have found it to be quite difficult and very time consuming to try and level back off your circle skirts or your bias skirts. Now, I often have to use my meter stick or my yardstick and try to measure down from my waistline and then mark where my hemline is going to be, and then go around the entire circle skirt, putting little markings to demarcate my new hemline, and then connecting the dots and then trimming it off, all before I'm able to hem it. Now, I've seen some of those fancy gadgets that you can sort of hang your garment on your dress form, and then you sort of spritz chalk, I think it is, right around the circumference of your hemline. And this gives you an easier marking that you can then just trim off, and then you can go about hemming your circle skirt. But I do not have any of those fancy gadgets, and so I have to take the time with my ruler and my marker and try the best as I can to get my hemlines level. So if I could not do this, then I wouldn't do this. But the problem is I really am fond of a circle skirt. I like the amount of volume that it introduces. It makes your garments very swishy, but it does not have the additional bulk at the waistline that you get when you're doing things such as gathering. Now, I quite like a gathered skirt as well. It's just that with a circle skirt, I'm not adding the appearance of additional bulk around the waistline. And I don't need no help, you guys, with the bulk at my waistline. But if I could skip the leveling off process and then hemming a circle skirt, which takes ages, you guys. Now, I have found that over time, I have gotten a lot quicker at doing the hemlines of my circle skirt. Most of the time, I think, is spent in actually trying to get it leveled off. Once I have it leveled off, I do actually like to run my circle skirt hem through my serger, and then I use my serger line as a guideline for turning under my hemline. It works a treat for me. I'm not going to say that that's the best way. There are probably better ways of doing it, but that is my preferred method. But as I said, if I could skip it altogether, I absolutely would. So there you have it, guys. Those were my 5 sewing processes or my sewing steps that I would skip if I could. Now that you have heard mine, I would definitely encourage you to drop me a comment down below and let me know what are some of the sewing steps or processes that you could do without. If you had a choice and you didn't have to do it, what would you omit from your sewing game? Now, if you liked today's video, be sure to go ahead and give me a thumbs up. And if you have gotten this far in today's video and you are not a subscriber, then please do consider subscribing and turning your notifications on your way out. Now, as I said, I got this idea from watching Pat's video. She had shared her 7 steps that she would love to miss in her sewing game. So I would absolutely recommend and encourage you to go on over to my girl's channel and give her video a watch and then give her a follow. She is a fellow island girl. She doesn't live here on Montserrat. I think she lives in the British Virgin Islands, but we are all Caribbean people. And so I would definitely implore you to go and give her a little bit of support. And I just want to say thank you, Pat, for this amazing idea for today's video. This is all you, girl. This is all you. It shows just how much as a sewing community we can learn and sort of vibe off each other. Coming up with original ideas in my mind is almost impossible. Everything that we say and do now has probably been done at some point before. But I just wanted to give a shout out to Pat for influencing me and encouraging me to share my 5 sewing steps that I would gladly miss. Now, until next time, you guys, stay calm, stay cool, stay safe, and absolutely keep sewing. Peace.